Hello, I am Peter Okwoche. Welcome to Focus on Africa. Our top stories. A journey through one of the world's most dangerous jungles. We have a special report on African migrants taking the ultimate risk to try to reach the United States.
There were also people who were walking. They didn't know how to climb the mountains. They did not have enough strength. So some of them fell and knocked their heads on rocks and died. So there are a lot of dead bodies.
Thousands gather in a stadium in Harare to pay tribute to Zimbabwe's former president, Robert Mugabe. His body is lying in state before his funeral. Almost 200 Nigerians are flown home following the xenophobic violence in South Africa. And that comes amid escalating levels of violent crime in South Africa. Latest figures show an average of 58 people killed each day, and many of them are children. And in sports, trials are being held in Kenya to see who will make the cut for the World Athletics Championships in Doha this month. Thanks for joining us here on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. When we hear stories about migrants from Africa trying to escape war and poverty, the route we usually think of is through Libya, across the Mediterranean and into Europe. But an increasing number are now seeking refuge in the US and Canada, using an equally dangerous route through Central America. Since January, nearly 3,500 Africans, many of them Cameroonians, fleeing conflict in their country, make their way to Ecuador and then to Colombia to trek across a lawless area of jungle heading north. The BBC's Catherine Biaruhanga has traveled with a group of migrants risking their lives on this fraught journey.
African migrants somewhere you wouldn't expect them to be, trekking through a South American jungle. We're traveling with Paul and his friends. Most of this group are Cameroonian. They say they're fleeing fighting, which has displaced over 500,000 people.
I hope I will reach where I will be free, where I will not be pursued, where I will not be persecuted by the army for unjust cause.
They're hoping to seek asylum in the US. But to get there, they're taking an extraordinary route. First, they took connecting flights from West Africa to Ecuador, a country with some of the most relaxed visa laws in the world. From there, they took buses to get to northern Colombia. In order to get to the next country, Panama, they'll have to cross the Darien Gap jungle. There are no roads here, and it's full of drug cartels, armed bandits, and poisonous animals.
I have no regrets because that for me to stay back home and die, I better go ahead and be safe. I don't regret.
It's just the beginning of the journey, but some of the group are already struggling. But they'll have to do this day in, day out for a week. We just said goodbye to the group. It's getting dark and they're rushing through, trying to make it to their first camping spot before nightfall. We've turned back, but they're continuing. And I really hope we can see all of them on the other side in Panama. We go to the camp in Panama where Paul and his friends should be arriving on the other side. We ask around, but there's no news. What we hear from others makes us fear the worst.
There were also people who were walking. They didn't know how to climb the mountains. They did not have enough strength. So some of them fell and knocked their heads on rocks and died. So there are a lot of dead bodies.
3 generations of Rose's family are on this journey. Her grandson, 2 daughters, and husband. She barely made it out to the jungle after nearly drowning twice.
I saw myself dying. I was in despair. I was waiting for God to save me because I knew I was dying. I had lost hope. I will never advise anybody to follow this path. Never. It is risking one's life.
We also hear from different people that women and girls have been raped by armed men. It's been almost a week since we set off with that group back in Colombia. They thought they would be here by now, but we haven't seen them at the camp, and we haven't been able to reach them on their phones either. So we're not quite sure where they are right now. Back in London, we get news from the camp. Hello, Paul. How are you?
No, fine.
It's so good to hear from you. It's been a while. Incredibly, Paul and all 30 of his group managed to make it through to Panama. He even managed to send me videos.
When you left us, we walked for about 6 hours, and we slept somewhere in the forest, the middle of the bush. We had a lot of hills that were climbing mountains and going down and crossing streams. One of the most dreadful things that we had to meet in the bush, dead bodies. Those are bones of a dead person, remains of a dead person. I nearly stepped on it. We saw another person tied on the tree. Oh, I was very afraid, and the head was cut off. No, I'm just going ahead. I'm not having any regret because I just want safety. Thank you.
That report by Catherine Biaruhanga, and she's now in the studio with me. Catherine, what a great report. You're still in touch with these guys. Do we know where they are at the moment?
Just think about it, Peter. After leaving Panama, they probably have 5 countries to get through before they get to the border with the United States and Mexico. So in a funny way, their journey just continues. So we've spoken to some of the people in Paul's group. They got split up, unfortunately, because it's such a big group to keep together. So some people manage to get ahead if they have enough money. At the moment, Paul, I spoke to him this morning, and obviously I shared the story with him. He can still communicate with him via WhatsApp. He says he's in Guatemala right now, but obviously it's a different context in Guatemala. The authorities have more control. They're trying to stop migrants in Guatemala. So he's having to get around the authorities compared to other countries. And they also talk about another forest in Nicaragua as well, where they have to trek for 2 days. So just think about it, road, boat, walking, whatever it takes, they're really trying to get to the US.
And what happens to them once they get to this border, if they manage to get to the US border with Mexico?
Well, that's a big question right now, because obviously President Trump has put in place a lot of measures to make sure that people do not get into the United States. So we have some people who do manage to cross illegally. We heard of this story in June where there were about 300 families that just turned up at the border, most of them Congolese. They managed to get through. Others wait, they try to register and then be heard properly by border officials to then get into the United States. But they complain about corruption. They say as Africans, when they get to the border, they join the queue as other migrants, including Central Africans and Asians, and they feel that they're being left behind. And they say they have to pay bribes in order to be able to get into the United States.
Once again, brilliant report. Thank you very much, Catherine Biaruhanga. Thanks a lot. Let's take a quick look now at other stories making the headlines across Africa. The authorities in the Democratic Republic of Congo say at least 50 people have been killed in a train accident in the southeast of the country. The freight train came off the tracks in the early hours of this morning in Tanganyika province. Many of the victims are reported to be stowaways. The UN Refugee Agency in Uganda says more than 220,000 refugee children are not going to school because of a funding shortfall. It says it has only raised 30% of the money needed for education programs. Uganda hosts more than 1 million refugees, mostly from South Sudan, the DRC and Burundi. The first World Vaccination Summit is taking place in Brussels. European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker opened the event saying it was intolerable that hundreds of thousands of children are still dying from preventable diseases. The summit aims to build confidence in vaccines and combat misinformation. A plane has arrived in Lagos, bringing home the first group of Nigerians who decided to leave South Africa following xenophobic violence in that country. Nearly 200 people were on board. Some 600 Nigerians have indicated that they want to return home following a wave of anti-immigrant violence in the cities of Pretoria and Johannesburg. Well, let's go to live to our reporter, Ajoke Ulohotse, who's in Lagos. Ajoke, what more can you tell us about the people who boarded this flight?
Well, Peter, 187 Nigerians returned to Nigeria yesterday from South Africa following, continuous attacks by locals and foreign nationals. A lot of them were obviously very happy. You could feel that in the way they boisterously sang the national anthem as they sat. They were happy to at least be alive at a time like this when a number of people have died in the attacks. And so it was majorly a feeling of relief, at coming to Nigeria alive. And for a few, of course, there were the tears, but then for the majority, it was a happy feeling. I spoke to a number of them, and here's what they had to say.
I'm happy anyway, because I'm coming to my home. Yeah, despite the fact I couldn't accomplish my mission here, but I got to go. So it's better for me to go home alive than being a dead man.
They are just after robbing, stealing from us. We black, and we are not telling them not to steal from us. They are stealing from us. We are okay, but what they are doing to us is not sharp.
I lost a car. I have the papers here. My car was one of the cars burned. With the whole situation, killing and looting shops and everything, I just decided, no, it's time to come back home.
Ajoke, so this first batch has come back home. Now we're expecting another batch very soon. But what is the Nigerian government doing for them?
Well, the Nigerian government, of course, has pledged support. The head of the Diaspora Commission met with the returnees yesterday, pledged support to supporting their reintegration back to society. And of course, yesterday they received, I think, about £90 actually in what we call top-up bills for their phone calls over the next 3 months. Then there was also, I think, about £60 for them to transport themselves to their various locations. And of course, the Bank of Industry here in Nigeria pledged financial support to those who may have lost their businesses in South Africa and who had serious hopes at reintegrating and starting business here in Nigeria. The head of the Diaspora Commission spoke to us.
I think it's a shame that in the African continent we still have a situation of blacks killing blacks. It's not something that any African should be proud of. I think it should be embarrassing to us all as Africans. As our president has said and he has been showing, we will continue to preach love, brotherliness and unity. So we just appeal to the South African government to show the political will to stop these killings. And one of the ways to do this is ensure that there are consequences for action.
As Abike Dabiri, head of the Nigerian Diaspora Commission, and before that I was speaking to our correspondent, Ajoke Ulohotse. Now to Zimbabwe, where there was a mini-stampede at the body viewing of the country's first democratically elected leader, Robert Mugabe's body, as he arrived at the Rufaro Stadium, accompanied by his widow Grace and their children. He will lie in state till Friday ahead of a funeral service over the weekend. The BBC's Shingai Nyoka reports from Harare.
The public had been waiting here all day in the hot sun for former President Robert Mugabe's body to arrive, and when the choppers landed, the stadium erupted in joy and celebration. The body was accompanied by his wife, Grace Mugabe, as well as the family, and they paid their respects first, followed by the crowds. And with all the anticipation, there was a stampede that the riot police had to come into control. These grounds are very symbolic. It's almost like a homecoming for Robert Mugabe. It's where close to 40 years ago the Union Jack was lowered and he raised Zimbabwe's flag of independence, marking the end of colonial rule. Now even here, amidst the celebration, the camaraderie, there's still a disagreement over where they think he should be buried.
Me, on my side, I don't like Mugabe to be buried in Heroes Acre. Because if you go back to the coup, the words that they used to say on him, it was not good.
Our former president must be buried at the national shrine for the whole Africa, the whole world, and the whole Zimbabwe. They must see him at the national shrine.
There's no official confirmation where Mr. Mugabe will be buried. The government believes that he no longer belongs to his family, rather to the nation of Zimbabwe. Shinganyoka, BBC News, Harare.
This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News with me, Peter Okwache. Still to come, Mimi chats to Leicester City and Nigeria international Wilfred Ndidi about going back to finish his studies whilst playing in the English Premier League. Welcome back. I'm Peter Okwache and this is Focus on Africa. Now, earlier on the program, we talked about Nigerians leaving South Africa due to xenophobic violence. Well, latest figures from South Africa show that the alarming levels of violent crime are still on the increase. The police annual crime report says that on average, 58 people were killed every day last year. Let's have a look at some of the figures. 21,000 people were murdered between April 2018 and March 2019. That's a rise from 20,336 over the same period in 2017 and 2018. Another concerning figure showed that over 1,000 of the victims were children, 29 more than during previous 12 months. Let's speak to the BBC's Milton Nkosi now. Milton, I mean, looking at those figures, the striking thing for me was the number of children killing children.
Oh, yes, indeed, Peter. Quite grim statistics today by the South African police minister in Parliament. He also addressed a press briefing soon after, and he told parliamentarians, this is Bheki Cele, who runs the police ministry here, he said that the picture I'm going to tell you is not rosy. And it turns out that with all the statistics that you've just given, murder rate was up by 3.4% from last year. And also, you ask about children, Peter. There are 736 murders committed by children.
Now, the issue of femicide as well and gender-based violence are major talking points in South Africa at the moment. What do the stats say about that?
Also very grim pictures about femicide and also rape. South Africa has got a high number of rape incidents. And now the police today were saying that the sexual violence increased by 4.6% over 50,000 incidents they were talking about. So incredibly grim statistics. But what they were also talking about there, Peter, was that the causes of crime. So crime is a policing matter itself, but the causes of crime move away from policing. They are social, economic, and psychological.
And very briefly, Milton, if you will, what plans have they put in place to bring down these numbers?
So essentially what they're trying to do is to, A, increase the number of police. South African police service has close to 200,000 members, policing a country of about 58 million. So they want to increase their intelligence as well.
Milton Nkosi, live there from Johannesburg. Thank you very much. Now you're watching BBC Focus on Africa. Let's get some sports now with Mimi.
Thank you very much, Peter. We start with athletics. At the end of the month, the World Athletics Championships take place in Doha. And today, Athletics Kenya held day one of the national trials in Nairobi. One of the highlights, the men's 5,000 meters, was won by Michael Kibet. Elsewhere, world record holder Beatrice Chepkoech already secured a spot for the competition in the women's 3,000-meter steeplechase. The three women who came in first, second, and third, Hyben Kiyang, Beatrice Chepkoech, and Selefin Chespal, crossed the finishing line in unity. The 28-year-old Chepkoech only made the transition to steeplechase 3 years ago.
2017 was my second time running 3,000 steeplechases. I was not having good experience, but for now at least I've been competing for so many diamond leagues and I've got experience. Yeah, I have for now the way my shape for now is good, and I know that I'm going to make, and my aim is to come with a gold home.
Staying with athletics, Olympic 800 meters champion Caster Semenya will be officially awarded her gold medal from 2011 World Athletics Championships at this year's edition in Doha. But she won't be there to receive it. Semenya was elevated to gold 2 years ago when Russian athlete Maria Savinova was disqualified for doping violations. But she won't be there, as I said, to receive it. Remember, Semenya is appealing the Court of Arbitration for Sports ruling that supported regulations introduced by the sports governing body, the IAAF. Moving on, it's not ever often you hear of a footballer going back to school whilst playing in the English Premier League week in, week out. But that's what Leicester City's Wilfred Ndidi has done. I traveled to Leicester to speak to him about how he juggles his university studies with club football.
It's not every day that an English Premier League football player comes to pick up a reporter. But here at the car park is Wilfred Ndidi. So where are we going now, Wilfred?
We're going to the university, we're going to BMU.
Wilfred is now taking me to De Montfort University in Leicester, where he's enrolled to study business. The 22-year-old is arguably one of the best midfielders in the English Premier League, earning thousands of pounds every week. He tells me why it was so important for him to finish his studies.
Growing up, when I was a kid, and my sister, my cousin, we didn't really have the opportunity to actually go to school because we couldn't, my dad couldn't afford it. After training I have spare time, so I just thought of it and I said, yeah, it's better I go to school.
So what was it like here on your first day when you started class?
Nerves? I was nervous, but you know, as the class went on, I started getting comfortable. Really? And then the teacher started telling me about things and making me understand and be calm, you know. So it was okay. First day was like that, but the rest of the days were okay.
You came from very humble beginnings, growing up in the military barracks. Your father was in the army. How has that shaped the player and the man that you are today?
You have so many parents around. It's not just your mom and your dad. Because if you misbehave, you get disciplined and by other people, even before your dad, even people who are ahead of your dad, and he can't say anything. So that's the way we grew up. And then I was helping my mom and hawking and all this.
Groundnuts,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yes.
selling groundnuts and all. But thank God for where we are today.
So what do you intend to do now when you finish your studies?
I want to try and make something like a football resort. There should be a school around. I think it's something that would be actually cool, very nice, because you can actually go to school and still play football. The players can actually be comfortable playing football. They can travel and then still have time to be in school.
And Wilfred Ndidi told me that one player thought who would have come up to him to talk about his degree was Jamie Vardy, but that didn't happen. And to some transfer news, former Cameroon captain Benjamin Mukanjo has returned to France to join Ligue 2 side Lens. The 30-year-old was released by Chinese Super League club Jiangsu Suning in February. He spent the 2018 season on loan with rivals Beijing Rennes. Last September, he retired from international football after being omitted by then Cameroon coach Clarence Seedorf, who captained his country to their 5th continental title in 2017. That's Benjamin Mukanjo. And that's all the sport. Back to you, Peter.
Thanks, Mary. I mean, many people who are journalists, you know, practicing journalists, they go back to school. So really, what's the big deal?
Well, I will go back to school one day.
I'm only kidding. Thank you very much. Thanks. Now, don't forget, you can get in touch with me and some of the team on social media. I'm at Okwoche. But for now, from me, Peter Okwoche, and the rest of the Focus on Africa team, thanks a lot for watching and see you again very soon.